any questions that you've got for our speaker, please can use the chat function. So if there's too many sort of hands up, it can just become quite difficult. So if you use the chat function, and Adam, I'll sort of keep an eye on the chat and just see what's coming in. There'll be an evaluation form at the end, which I'll put into the chat box, sort of with the last sort of 5 minutes of the session. So please do fill that out, and that will help us in future years as well, to be able to review that. So that's about it. That's sort of where we are. Just a reminder, if we could keep our cameras and our mics off through the whole session, that would be great. Sarah, is it just going to record?
Yeah, I've started the recording, and I've also got access to the evaluation. So I'll put that into the chat in the last 5 minutes. So yeah, should be all ready to go. So, we'll just check that Adam can share his presentation. That would be great. But you probably want.
Lovely, thank you, Sarah. And Adam, I'll hand over to you now to do some introductions of yourself and see if you can get that presentation up.
Right, well, I can still see you on the screen. No, I've lost you, Sarah. I've just shared my screen.
Working. Yeah,
can someone see my screen? That's a relief. Okay, that's a good start, isn't it? Thank you. Right, marvellous. All right, thank you, Liz. Welcome everybody. By way of introduction, for those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Adam O'Loughlin. I'm a temporary Chief Inspector with Avon and Somerset Police. I'm the LPA Commander for North Somerset, which is where I'm based nominally at Western. This is a somewhat unusual experience, as I'm sure you would all appreciate. Although we've had teams for a while now, it does feel very much like I'm talking to myself. So forgive me, because I can't see any of you. I can see my own screen, but that's pretty much about it. The other observation I had before we get started is that me talking for an hour is a very long time. I will do my absolute level best to make sure I keep us on track and keep us to time. If you do have any questions, I can't see the chat bar, so please do write them in there, and I know that it's being monitored. I'm unlikely to be able to see them or answer them as we're going along. However, I am entirely comfortable if anybody does want to interrupt me, if Liz or Sarah, if you do want to stop me talking to ask a question that's pertinent at that time, do please feel free to do so, because as I said, I can't see any hands up or anything on my screen. I'm afraid to say I can only see my own presentation.
That's fine. I'll monitor it for you, Adam, and I'll jump in.
Marvellous. Thank you very much indeed. Right, so I have been asked to talk to you this morning about adult exploitation, specifically looking at county lines, which I'm more than happy to do as something that we spend a lot of our time thinking about here in North Somerset. And so the first thing I'm going to do is pose a question that I'd like you all to think about. I'm not expecting anyone to answer it, so that's fine. Please don't think that. About what adult exploitation is. Because there's a number of different ways of describing it and a number of different ways of looking at it. However, let's see if I can get that slide to move. There we go. Right. Okay. For our purposes, we define adult exploitation as an individual or group, it's quite important, who coerces, controls, manipulates, or deceives or exploits someone through fear of violence or threat of violence, and or the financial or other advantage of the perpetrator, and or in exchange for something the victim needs or wants. Now, the victim may have been exploited even if the activity appears consensual. Exploitation does not always involve physical contact. It can occur using technology. Now, before I carry on, I do want to focus on number 3 for a second, as I think it's really important. One of the key factors found in most cases of county lines exploitation is the presence of some form of exchange. For example, carrying drugs in return for something. Where does the victim who is offered, promised, or given something that they need or that they want? The exchange can include both tangible things such as money, drugs, clothes, and intangible rewards as well, such as status, protection, or the perceived friendship or affection of another person. And that's something I'm going to touch on later on, because from a personal perspective, I think it's very important. What I want you to keep in mind and want you to bear in mind is that it's important to remember the unequal power dynamic within which this exchange occurs. And it's become important for policing to remember that the receipt of something by a vulnerable adult does not make them any less of a victim. It's also important to note that the prevention of something negative can also fulfill the requirement for that exchange. So, for example, a young person who engages in county lines activity to stop someone carrying out a threat to harm his or her families. And so there are a number of different types of criminal exploitation, which I suspect you've all heard of. Examples of these are criminal exploitation, as I just alluded to, where victims are forced or coerced into criminal activities, to shoplifting, transporting or selling drugs. We also have sexual exploitation. Victims are forced or coerced into sexual activity. This also occur online, for example, forced to perform sexual acts or take or send indecent images. Or perhaps modern slavery, where victims are recruited, slide me very slowly, my apologies, where victims are recruited, moved or harboured through the use of force, coercion, abuse of their vulnerability, deception or other means for the purpose of exploitation. Holding a person in a position of slavery, servitude, forced or compulsory labour, or facilitating the travel, I should say, with the intention of exploiting them soon after is also a crime, as you know. So, for example, victims made to work for free through violence or intimidation, child slavery or trafficking. Today, as I discussed, I'm going to be focusing on criminal exploitation, particularly county lines, as well as focusing on the types of prevention and disruption activity my teams are engaged in. I'm also going to spend a little bit of time thinking about what our role as professionals is and perhaps what we can look for. Before I do that, the first thing I would like you to do is have a look at a social media post. Now, as most of you can tell, this is from Twitter. For those of you who are not on Twitter or are perhaps unfamiliar with it, let's just call it a social media platform with over 700 million users. Although if recent news is anything to go by, it is rapidly going to disappear from our lives, thanks to Elon Musk. Anyway, I imagine all of you, with your professional heads on, will look at the tweet and form an entirely appropriate human reaction to the implications contained within it. However, those involved in perpetrating criminal exploitation will no doubt think something very different. And that thing they're thinking is very often nothing more complicated than, I am a victim, find me and exploit me. Which leads us to the inevitable question of what we can do. Well, we can't monitor or watch them 24 hours a day, regardless of what we might have been told about the technological capabilities of police. But we can and do observe behaviour change. And this is an example of something that somewhat neatly demonstrates from a policing perspective the absolute value of neighbourhood policing, which you can't identify when someone's behaviour is changing if you don't know how they usually behave. It's all about knowing. And this is one of the reasons why my teams in North Somerset, from my PCsOs to my local remedy proactive team, spend a significant proportion of our time getting to know the most vulnerable members of our communities, building relationships with them, understanding them, learning about them, so that if their behaviour does change and we begin to notice signs of exploitation, then we can intervene, so that we can do something about it. And so my local remedy team in particular conduct literally dozens of visits to vulnerable members of the community on a regular basis to look to see if anything's changed and if there are any signs of anything such as cocooning. Now, we'll come on to cocooning in a second, but before I do so, I do just want to talk about vulnerability. Now, the next slide is a list of things that make people vulnerable. None of it will be of any surprise to any of you. It's the things that we're all talking about in our professional capacity and the things that we all think about and worry about on a daily basis. So I'm going to put them all up there at once. I'm not going to read them out. They're fairly obvious. I do, however, just want to touch on two of them, and this is from a strictly personal perspective. And those are social isolation or social difficulties and a physical or learning disability. Now, the bit I want to focus on there is the learning disability and the social isolation element of it. And the reason I want to do so is because, as well as my role as the temporary chief inspector for North Somerset, I'm also Avon and Somerset's force lead for autism. Now, for many of you, you will know exactly what autism is, a social communication disability in many cases, or a learning difference, as it's also been described. What our suspicion is, and this is nationally, not just in North Somerset, although there's very little evidence for it. What our suspicion is that those of us who are on the autism spectrum or display autistic traits are more likely to be vulnerable to being cocooned as adults or to be exploited as adults. Part of the reason for that is something called theory of mind, or mind blindness, which is basically a difficulty in understanding the thoughts and feelings, emotions and intentions of others, and not perhaps understanding when somebody doesn't have our best interests at heart. So we spend a significant amount of time here in North Somerset, from a policing perspective, thinking about our autistic community, thinking about the plans we have and the things we do, such as safe places that can assist them, so that if they do, people from that community do find themselves exploited, or they do find themselves with a sudden group of friends that have come from nowhere who seem to have their best interests at heart, we can help them as far as that's concerned. Now, this is something that I've discussed at length with the University of Bath and other academic institutions around the UK, and there is a significant lack of research into this particular area, something that we, policing nationally, as part of the National Police Chiefs Council, are looking at very closely to see whether or not we can commission. Now, I will come on to Cocoon now. No doubt
Adam,
you will all be aware. Yeah.
I've got a hand up. Do you
Oh,
want
go on.
to,
Yes, by all means.
Tony, do you want to jump in? Hoping, unless you've put your hand up by mistake.
Yeah.
Oh, no, there's Tony.
Okay.
Hi, Tony.
I put it up by mistake.
Okay. Well, at least you know I'm reactive if you do put your hand up. Sorry, Adam, carry on.
No, not at all. Not at all. Right, where do we get to? We were about to talk about cocooning, weren't we? That's fine. Right. Okay, so let's talk about cocooning. Now, I have pinched this slide, if I'm honest with you, from victim support, mostly because I think it's really, really good. Now, no doubt you will all be aware of what cocooning is. However, for the sake of simplicity, the definition I'm going to use is when a criminal gang or criminals take over a vulnerable person's home by force or intimidation to use it as a base for illegal activities. So what are we looking for? Interestingly, this is one of those slides that when you read it seems somewhat self-evident, but what I can say from my own professional experience is that it's really quite easy to miss them in isolation. So you'll see them appearing on the screen now. Most of it, as I said, is fairly obvious, particularly around signs of drug use, signs of decline in mental well-being, damage to property, more people leaving or entering the property, which I think is really interesting. And I think what this slide does is demonstrate for me and for policing the absolute value of partnership working. Other than the vulnerability visits that I mentioned earlier, our experience in North Somerset and in Baines, where I used to work before this, is that the first point of contact for the police is this one, an increase in antisocial behaviour. So this one here in the top left-hand corner. No doubt you all have similar multi-agency arrangements in place to tackle ASB. In North Somerset, we have a weekly ASB steering group, which is attended not only by statutory partners, but also by housing associations. Now, we're relatively lucky that we don't have a huge number of housing associations in North Somerset, and that's not a criticism, by the way. All the people I've met from various housing associations in my career are lovely people. This is very much the first point of contact for us if there's been either an uplift in ASB or a change to a resident or service user's behaviour. And so when it comes to that particular part of cocooning, our experience here in Avon and Somerset is that we'll very often hear it from a housing association colleague first. And this leads me neatly onto one of our other disruption factors, which no doubt many of you will have heard of, which is the disruption panel. Here in North Somerset, we've gone through something of a refresh as to how our disruption panels are run, who attends, and how often they convene. Firstly, I think it'd be fair of me to say that there is absolute agreement that they are necessary, and that where there's been challenge for us has been around the details. And the conclusion I think we've come to is that the colleagues and partners who attend the ASB steering group are the same people who would attend disruption. And so what we do is we intend to hold them together. Our ASB steering group is once a week, and we will bring any discussions around cocooning, around vulnerability, around county lines into that particular group, because that is where we feel the best place to have that conversations is, and where the people who are the most important stakeholders are already meeting. Moving on, I think it's worth touching on the main drivers of adult exploitation in North Somerset, and one of those is undoubtedly deprivation. North Somerset has the third largest inequality gap in the country, with areas falling in the most deprived 1% in England. 9 neighbourhoods in Western Supermare are amongst the most deprived in England, according to government statistics in 2019. 2 areas within the South Ward are leading the group for locations at most risk within the town of Western Supermare itself. They're ranked 120th and 266th out of the 32,000 areas in the country. And the remaining 7 neighbourhoods are in the South and Central and West Wards of the town. 12 more areas in North Somerset are ranked in the top 30% and are all also in Western Supermare. Now, what this means from a policing perspective is that as well as cocooing, vulnerable adults are also particularly vulnerable to a county lines activity. If we use the NCA definition of county lines, which is where illegal drugs are transported from one area to another, often across police and local authority boundaries, although not exclusively, I should say, which is done usually by children of vulnerable adults who are coerced into it. Now, The county line, for those of you that haven't heard the definition before, tends to be the mobile phone line used to take the orders for drugs importing areas where the drugs are taken to or reporting increased levels of violence, weapons-related crimes as a result of this trend, and that is something we have seen in North Somerset. Now, tackling county lines and supply gangs responsible for these high levels of violence, exploitation and abuse of vulnerable adults is a priority for us in the police and also for UK law enforcement as a whole. And we have been collectively stepping up our response, working to identify and take effective action in areas of the country with the most significant problems. So what do we look for? And as personally, what can you look for when it comes to establishing a vulnerable adult as becoming county lines activity? Well, one of the things that might not immediately spring to mind is the use of travelling in taxis or private hire vehicles. And with that in mind, these are the things that you can look out for. And you'll see them coming up on the screen now. So one of the things we look at first off is adults, and to be fair, in particular in this case, children travelling alone. Adults travelling when they should be somewhere else, or during unusual hours, particularly during the hours of darkness. One of the other things that we notice here in North Somerset is people who might seem unfamiliar with the local area or not have a local accent. Now, to be completely honest, I'm not from the Southwest originally myself, and it wouldn't be unfair of me to describe the Southwest accent as being distinctive. But something I'm sure you will all appreciate, probably better than I can, is that local accents vary even from town to town. And so to give you an example, a South Bristol accent, which is where I live, even I can tell sounds quite differently to that of a resident of Weston-super-Mare. So while we're talking about vastly different accents as well, such as people from perhaps the larger cities in the UK, Manchester or Liverpool being good examples, accent variations can be quite subtle, and we have noticed that. Indeed, there is a particular issue currently in one area of Weston that we are aware of, and the first sign we had of it was when a local shopkeeper mentioned in passing to a PCsO that he had noticed a number of people coming into his shop with what he described as Scouse or Liverpudlian accents. And again, in other parts of our force area, as well as North Somerset, we have in the past encountered taxis from vastly different parts of the UK. And finally, and interestingly, particularly in an increasingly cashless society, cash is still particularly in favour by those engaged in criminal activity for fairly anonymous reasons around anonymity. So again, it's something to look out for. So what does all this look like from a strategic perspective in North Somerset? Well, we have a 4Ps plan, which I'm confident you will know about the 4Ps, part of which you will be able to see on the screen in a minute. We'll press the button, there we go. But just in case you don't, the 4Ps are pursue, prevent, protect, and prepare. Now, I'm not expecting you to be able to read that. I just use it as an example of how many words I can fit onto one page and then onto one screen. So what we've done here in North Somerset is rather than do one big 4Ps plan here, what we've done is to do a smaller 4Ps process for 4 key thematics, which are safeguarding adults and children, reducing vulnerability, reducing reoffending, and engaging with communities. So we have a 4Ps plan for each of those 4. So in effect, we're replicating it 4 times, which we think both makes it much more targeted and also much more effective and, quite frankly, easier to measure. Now, of those 4Ps, the one that most readily springs to mind for me and the one which we, the police, lead on is pursue. Now, this is the majority of what you might consider to be traditional policing activity, from proactive patrolling we do right up to covert tactics and clever technical work around mobile phones. Here in Avon and Somerset, as well as having a local proactive capability within North Somerset, I also benefit from full-fledged resources, whether that's intelligence or the regional organised crime units, right up to National Crime Agency. But be under no illusions, the best and in many cases most effective tactic we have to identify county lines activity and vulnerable adults within our communities remains neighbourhood policing, and that will remain the case, I'm sure, even as time goes by. So that is probably me talking at you for 20 minutes, which is a long time to talk, I don't mind saying, and it is what I hope has been an interesting and insightful look into how we deal with these issues here in North Somerset. I will now say thank you for your time and ask if anybody has any questions or anything they'd like to add or anything they'd like to challenge in particular about anything you've heard from me today. This is normally the bit where we end up with stunned silence and I sit here desperately hoping nobody asks me anything.
Desperately hoping. I like that, Adam. Has anybody got any questions for Adam? So we have still got quite a bit of time left.
We do,
so,
yeah.
Yeah, it would be really good if anybody's got anything they want to ask, or, you know, any reflections around any work that anybody's done, who, you know, would quite like a police perspective maybe, then please jump in.
Hi, I work for 1625 independent people, and I'm responsible for a few shared houses across Bristol. In one of mine, since starting, we have had an experience of cuckooing. I'm just kind of wondering what you would say to kind of help prevent cuckooing happening in houses which are quite known to be vulnerable. I think a lot of the time my shared houses are known to the wider community as being supported housing. And that makes it difficult time after time. We can move people on into different services, different houses, but it just tends to be the houses getting targeting because they know it's supported housing. Would you say there's any kind of way we can prevent that at all, or anything we can put into place?
So I'm not an expert when it comes to this kind of thing, Ray. I have to be completely honest with you about that. But one of the things I think you probably have mentioned, which I think is really important, is around designing out crime and around a sort of architectural liaison and that kind of thing. We do know, and we have similar experience here in North Somerset actually, that properties get targeted because of the nature of that property, as well as the people who are contained within it. And that is why when we look at, I alluded to it earlier on, one of the things we look at is when those properties change, whether or not it's when they almost get target hardened themselves. We see new windows going in, or things blocking the windows, or new doors going in, particularly those reinforced ones. I mean, it's difficult for me as a police officer to give you a definitive answer to that, because the challenge is always working in partnership with the person who owns the building, or the housing association who runs the building as well, which is the case. Where we've had the most success with that, both in North Somerset and Baines, where I worked previously, is if you think back to that multi-agency meeting framework I was talking about, is when we can have an open and frank discussion about the challenges that we're facing. Because one of the things that I think we probably would all agree on is that vulnerability in county lines activity does or can look subtly different to each agency. And so what we might think is vulnerable is very different to other people's both experiences and expectations. So one of the immense values of getting together, even via ASB steering or disruption or whatever meeting framework you're using, is getting a shared understanding of exactly what you're dealing with. Once you've got to the point where you've got a shared understanding of it, then you're in a position where you can understand who's best placed to tackle that particular issue. And that's not about assigning blame or moving responsibility around. That's about how we can work together to make changes for the better. And be under no illusions. Policing doesn't just sort of turn around and say, right, it's your building, you fix it, and then we won't get called anymore. We know that that doesn't work, and that's a fairly old-fashioned way of looking at it. We certainly have plenty of specialist resources in terms of providing advice on how things can be changed and what physical changes can be made to improve a property. So I would advise you, if you haven't already done so, and I'm sure you have here in Bristol, that speaking to local policing colleagues there and seeing what support is available. I'm more than happy to make that connection for you myself, if I can for you. But it is a really interesting point, isn't it? Because it isn't just necessarily about people and themselves that makes them vulnerable. Sometimes it might be the position they find themselves in, or physically where they are, that contributes to that vulnerability and makes things really difficult, doesn't it? Yeah, so I wholeheartedly agree with you, and I think it's something that probably does need to be looked at. But let's not be under any illusions. If I hear the words housing crisis on the news one more time over the next coming days, then it's just in the news all the time, isn't it? Something that we're talking about all the time as well. So.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for that.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Adam. We've got a few questions coming through on the chat. So Sarah said, do all areas of Avon and Somerset operate in... Oh, can you hear me, Adam?
I can. I went to hit chat and actually hit camera. That's how well that went for me. So.
Okay. So Sarah's question is, do all areas of Avon and Somerset operate in the same way as you've described in North Somerset?
Okay, well, that's a really interesting question. So the answer to that is probably not. But that's not because, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. So we have to be responsive to local communities. We have to be responsive to local context. And each area within our force is different, as I'm sure you can probably imagine. The depths of Somerset are very different to the large urban areas in Bristol. And of course, each local authority works in a slightly different way as well. So, for example, in South Gloucestershire, where I worked many years ago, the ASB team is embedded within the council. So we actually have police employees working with the council. Sarah, I hope that's still the case. If that hasn't changed since I was there, please do feel free to correct me if that's the case. So, and the thing for Avon and Somerset as well is that it's in our interest for everybody to get things done the same way, because we're one agency covering a whole area, so it would make sense for us to like to do things in the same way. But we know that we can't do that. We have to be quite responsive to local demand. We also have to be able to flex to work the way in which our local authority partners, housing associations and third-party providers work with us. So the answer to that question, Sarah, is no. They don't. They do all work subtly different. We do try and keep things as consistent as we can, but it's right and proper that we're responsive to local demand and flexible enough to work with our partners in the way that they need us to.
Adam. So we've got another question from Catherine. Do you encourage intelligence submission from charities and partner agencies?
Again, speaking from a personal perspective, absolutely. The more information and intelligence that we get from our community, the better. And one of the key roles of neighbourhood policing, certainly in my town, I've been in neighbourhood policing for over a decade now. One of the key roles of neighbourhood policing is community intelligence and speaking with partners and understanding what's going on. I can't think of a single reason why we would discourage intelligence submissions from anybody who wants to tell us something that they feel is important. And it's a role for us, I think, within policing to make sure that those routes into us are easy and the people are able to provide that intel to us in a way that they're comfortable with, and also gets to the right person at the right time so that we can do something about it. Never forget, and I did put it on the screen earlier on because I pinched one of their slides as well, that Crime Stoppers is a particularly important charity for us as well, which is always anonymous. And so I think that it's really important that we continue to do that and continue to encourage it as well.
We've also got, so I've got two questions from Sarah. I'll put them together, Sarah. So how often do you deal with adult exploitation and county lines? And how would we identify adult exploitation and county lines when you don't see people face to face?
Sorry, what was the first part of that again? Sorry, apologies, I missed the first bit.
That's okay. So how often do you deal with adult exploitation and county lines?
That's a very difficult question to answer because, you know, obviously these things don't just come in discrete packages or discrete bundles. So we don't just deal with one thing one day and one thing another day. And so county lines and exploitation is, in my view, it's interwoven inextricably into almost everything that we do these days. I think I read a statistic not long ago that said that dealing with crime in the police is somewhere like 15 to 20% of our work, and the rest of it is included in lots of other different things that we do. So I guess how it feels, certainly to my guys on the front line, is that we're probably dealing with exploitation every day, or we're certainly dealing with vulnerability every day. And obviously anyone who's vulnerable to exploitation, and that comes up in a variety of different means. What we also have in terms of one of the things I didn't go into actually when we're talking about how we do it is we do very often have days of action. We very often do things such as Operation Scepter, Operation Scorpion, which are particularly focused on dealing with this kind of activity, where we can devote significantly more resources to it, which provides us with an opportunity to really sort of tackle these issues. So, I mean, county lines activity does occur within Avon and Somerset. There's absolutely no reason why anyone would think other than that, and it is a particular challenge for us. As I alluded to earlier on, it's a priority for policing as a whole, and certainly within neighbourhood policing, it's something that even if we're not tackling it directly ourselves, I would suggest that we're engaged in tackling through all of the ways we do things on an almost daily basis. And forgive me, what was the second part of that?
How would we identify adult exploitation and county lines when we don't see people face to face?
So this is really difficult, isn't it? I'm not sure there's actually a really easy answer to that question. One of the ways in which that we've done it in the past in North Somerset, particularly with our vulnerable cohort. So my local remedy team, for example, my proactive capability, one of the things they do on a regular basis, as I alluded to earlier on, was vulnerability checks. So they will go and visit people. And of course, those people aren't there all the time. They're out doing different things in their daily lives. And particularly when that threat comes in by technology, it's a very tricky thing to do. One of the ways in which we identify people who might be getting sucked into something along those lines is if they're not doing the things we would expect them to do or being in the places we would expect them to be. So we tend to look sort of quite geographically about this, but then we know people are at school or college or perhaps are accessing other services and they don't turn up. That's one of the ways that we'd look to deal with that, particularly for the homeless community, who, may I say, are some of the most vulnerable members of society and absolutely forefront of our minds when it comes to dealing with exploitation if they're not where we would expect them to be. So it's a very difficult question to answer. I don't think I've really given a particularly good answer to it, if I'm completely honest with you. But I think that therein lies the absolute priority that we would place on multi-agency working arrangements to make sure that we're aware of this stuff as early as we can be.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, isn't it, Adam? It's that multi-agency perspective as well, and making sure that all agencies are communicating with each other and sharing their information. Where it's, sorry, that was my cat. Where they think it's necessary.
And actually, I think that's a really important point, both for me in North Somerset and for other parts of the force and other parts of the country as well. Those arrangements are really only as good as the relationships we build.
Yeah.
And they only really work when those relationships are strong and when those relationships are durable. One of the things that I'm very, very grateful for and fortunate to have is a really good working relationship with North Somerset Council, and dare I say, having worked in Baines, as I alluded to earlier on, and in South Gloucestershire, those relationships were equally strong. And it's only when relationships break down that information stops being shared appropriately. And so that's one of the things that my role is to prioritize and focus on, is to ensure that all of our partner agencies, whether that's a housing association, whether or not it's a local authority, or any of our third-party agencies, feel that they can talk to us when they need to, challenge us when they're not getting what they need from us, but also make sure that we're still talking to each other and we're sharing information. And information sharing as a topic we could talk about all day, couldn't we? Which I know is very tricky, but I know, and that's not what I'm alluding to. I'm not alluding to the formal sharing of data. What I'm talking about is relationships, and the absolute priority we have to make sure that they remain robust and remain strong.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. Okay, we've got quite a few, so I am getting through to them, everyone. So we've got a question from Emma. What is the prosecution rate for Cocoon and county lines crime? Are you seeing any reduction in these crimes?
Okay, so politicians' answer coming up. I will apologise, Emma, in advance. I don't know what the prosecution rate is, but I will find out and I will get back to you. I cannot speak for the force as a whole. What I can tell you is that here in North Somerset, with the proactive work that we've done, with the safeguarding work that we've done and the partnership work we've done, this year, and I reported this Community Safety Board actually at North Somerset, so I know this is correct, I read it, we've seen a 23% reduction in drug-related crime in North Somerset. The majority of that is in Weston-super-Mare. So we know that it is working. We know that we have made Weston a really hostile place for county lines to operate. And we've done that by, quite frankly, using really traditional, really robust policing tactics, as well as working in partnership as well. We know what works as far as this stuff is concerned. We just need to make sure we're doing the right things. So yes, I think we probably would say we are seeing a reduction in these crimes. And actually, one of the issues that I alluded to earlier on with people from outside of the area coming into Weston in an attempt to sell drugs or take control of the drug market is something that periodically crops up, and this happens all over the force area as well. When we have a significant amount of success and we create a gap, and that gap is then filled by people who are coming in from other parts of the country. The challenge for us is to make sure that when we take that enforcement activity, we don't leave a gap behind, and we continue with the activity to make sure we don't then cause further harm or vulnerability or exploitation moving forwards. So it's a very long-winded way of saying, yes, we are seeing a reduction. I don't know what the rate is, Emma, but I'm happy to get back to you with the answer.
Next question from Rachel. If a person is being exploited, what support can the police offer them?
Okay, so, well, I mean, wow, that's a really difficult question to answer, isn't it? I mean, from a policing perspective, I mean, there's lots and lots of different things. It depends what that vulnerability looks like, and it depends what kind of support that person is prepared to accept. I am fully convinced, and I am very keen to ensure that as neighbourhood officers, getting to know our communities and being able to provide the support, whether or not that is formal or not, is something that we absolutely should be doing. We've had quite a significant amount of success in Nails. He actually was a very, very vulnerable man, in order to provide him the support that he needed so that he wasn't coming to our attention on a regular basis. And was that Rachel who asked that question?
Yes.
Yeah, be under no illusions, Rachel. This is absolutely, in my view, something the police should be doing. And the reason I think that is because it saves us work in the long term. So this is part of crime prevention and it's part of demand reduction. So providing support to people, even if that is nothing more than visiting them on a daily basis to make sure that they're okay, is something that here in North Somerset I'm very keen to support. Obviously, as well, through the Lighthouse and through our partner agencies, we have all the referral processes that we need. Particularly one of those is, of course, those who are victims of hate crime. We have very robust referral processes for that, so I'm quite happy to put Rachel in touch with my Lighthouse colleagues so we can talk through what that referral process looks like. But I am fully convinced and an enthusiastic supporter of the police providing support to vulnerable people to prevent them from becoming victims of crime, becoming exploited in the first place.
So I've got Louise has said, as an NPT officer, we get to know our communities and people. We are ingrained in these communities if we have covered them for a long time, especially. So.
That's a really interesting point Louise has made. And you'll have to forgive me for Louise, because I have just looked on Outlook and I can see that you're a PCsO down in Wellington. I think this is a point that's worth making, and it's something that probably isn't said often enough. PCsOs are absolutely worth their weight in gold. They genuinely are. In some cases, quite a few cases, they're actually better at engaging with communities and better at understanding and identifying vulnerabilities in police officer colleagues. And I'm enormously grateful for the work that our PCsOs do here in North Somerset, and also that I know they do across the rest of the force area, including in Somerset. I think we're coming up on 20 years of PCsOs now in Avon and Somerset. That's how long we've been around for, and they are an invaluable part of our toolkit when it comes to, as Louise alludes to, knowing our communities and understanding those people.
We've then got, I'll read Louise's comment next because I think it sort of just flows a little bit with where we are. So
okay.
I'd like to applaud some of the work that the neighbourhood officers do in keeping people safe, as keeping people as safe as possible when they are being cocooned or exploited. Have seen impressive piece of work here in Somerset around supporting an older person with memory problems who was exploited. Thanks for that, Louise.
Oh, that's really pleasant to hear. Thank you, Louise. I'll pass that on to neighbour colleagues. If you wouldn't mind just letting me know which part of Somerset that is, I will pass that on to colleagues, whether or not that's East Somerset or West Somerset.
And then we've got what would be the best method to refer a vulnerable person who you suspect may be being exploited in Bristol?
Well, there's a number of different ways of doing that. Someone can either do that on the phone by ringing 101 and just explain the details, or they can contact their local neighbourhood team via our website. In fact, that would probably be the easiest way to do it in the first instance. I would have thought all the neighbourhood officers have got the details on our website, in which you can contact the sergeant or one of the PCsOs or beat managers from that area, and then have a conversation with them about that. We will then go away and record that, because that's what we have to do to make sure that we're aware of what that looks like and what we need to do in terms of making sure that we do the referrals. So was that Danny, was it?
Yeah.
My suggestion would be, Danny, is have a look on the Avon and Somerset Police website for the area that is of most relevance, and make sure that message is passed that way. Any issues though, do please feel free to come back to me, and I'll make sure that those connections are made.
And Louisa said Taunton, Adam.
Taunton, right. Okay, that's fine. I will pass that on to Justin French. Actually, the Taunton team are very good.
We've got Catherine. As with radicalisation, is there a programme to divert from exploitation?
That's an interesting question to which I don't know the specific answer. One of the things I didn't touch on earlier on, which is something that I think is probably worth mentioning, is something called Cyber Prevent. It sort of feeds into the question we were talking about earlier on. It's a program that's run by the National Crime Agency, and it's particularly looking at vulnerability and exploitation online. So it's looking at people who are expressing, radicalized views, or perhaps are being flagged up as using social media as someone who is worthy of concern. They do a significant amount of work to engage with people who are going along down those routes. They provide us with training actually as to what we're supposed to be looking for online and things like that. So as well as the Prevent program, which is looking at particularly at terrorism offences, Cyber Prevent sounds the same, but it is a bit different. And so I think that probably neatly falls into the exploitation online thing that we were discussing earlier on. And that would probably be the ideal route to go down in the first instance, I would suggest.
Thank you, that's really helpful. Amanda has said, I'd echo Louise's comment. My experience involved elderly, vulnerable people in Yeovil and Taunton. Made a real difference to both people. Thank you. Okay. Covered everybody. Surprisingly difficult to make sure that you've asked every single question. Sylvia, I don't know if you want to jump in. I haven't asked your question. I wasn't sure what you meant. You've put, I'm guessing, missing doctor's appointment constantly, etc. So I don't know whether you were maybe just agreeing with the conversation.
That would be a very interesting way of understanding whether someone's behaviour has changed, whether their habits have changed. I would have thought in terms of whether or not they're being exploited or whether or not they're becoming increasingly vulnerable. That's an excellent point. You know, that's the kind of thing that the way the police would want to know about. If someone is continually missing appointments, then that would perhaps trigger us doing a vulnerability visit to make sure they're okay.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you, Adam. Yeah, Elizabeth. Thank you.
Kind of gave the answer for you there, so we didn't. I apologies for that.
Thanks, Sylvia. Okay. Nikki's put people's vulnerabilities, which can make them more susceptible to being targeted by organised crime, can also make them reluctant to seek or accept help from public services. Is there anything that you have found can make the biggest difference?
This is a really interesting point, Nikki, and I'm really glad that you raised that. And we see this again, taking my North Somerset hat off and put my autism hat back on again. This is something we see particularly with the autism community. I have lost count of the number of vulnerable adults who are in the community that I've had conversations my entire career that go a bit like this. And I'll make up a name so I'm not giving anyone, so I'm not sharing anything inappropriately. Stephen, these people are not your friends. Yes, they are. No, they're not. They're using you for criminality, but they come in my house. They buy me alcohol. They buy me drugs, but they're not your friends. If I didn't let them in, I wouldn't see anyone ever at any point. And this is what autistic people tell us on a regular basis, because they misunderstand what other people's intentions are. And that's particularly difficult for people who don't necessarily agree that they have anything different about them that might cause them to be more vulnerable. So that's a really, really tricky question to answer. Where we've had the most success with that, Nikki, and this actually ironically feeds into our representative workforce piece of work, is when we've got people working for us within the organisation who either share that protected characteristics or have personal experience of it, that can then actually have conversations with people from a position of greater knowledge and perhaps also greater credibility as well. So I very often have conversations with people saying, I do understand completely how that feels because my brain is wired the same as yours is, but you will have to take my word for it, but these people are not being your friends as far as that's concerned. When that does happen, it is extremely important for us to intervene as early as we can, particularly focusing on the perpetrators in this case. Particularly focusing on the perpetrators, because vulnerable people in the way that you're describing them can be a very, very tough nut to crack. There are still support services available. I know across the north of our force in the BNSSG, ICB, there is still Bristol Autism Spectrum Service, which does provide us and the community with support as well. And we have worked alongside BAS on a fairly regular basis to try and get that message across. But I would agree with you that it's a very, very difficult thing to do. And you are right, what makes people susceptible to being targeted also makes them much more reluctant to seek help. So it's a tricky one.
And I'm going to come to Andrew, but I'll just read a comment from Louise first because I think it probably flows. Is elderly people as well are very proud, but building rapport, trust and respect helps break barriers down and help.
Yeah.
Nikki, again, relationships and supportive communities, so key. Thank you. So Andrew, you've got your hand up. Do you want to come in?
Yes, it was about how we deal with people that may be radicalised. I used to work in Bath and now work in Bristol, but when I was in Baines, I personally went to a family about 10 times, and I was working with the child or the young adult and the family because they had concerns they were being, the young adult was being radicalised. And I did personal chats with them and sat them down. And in the end, they weren't being radicalised, but they were being bullied and people were trying to get them into drugs. And we've diverted them from that. So sometimes your neighbourhood team can have an intervention. If they feel that there's more to it, then they can also escalate it up to the prevent and other areas that can do more specific interventions as well.
And actually, you kind of answered your own question there, really. Hi, Andy, by the way, nice to see you again. Andy used to work alongside me at Bath. Actually, that's the reason I said that. You are right, though, Andy. I mean, you can go as far as a prevent referral if you think somebody is in danger of being radicalised. But I think what you touched on is a really important point there again. And again, to echo Nikki's point, you know, we're very good at putting things in boxes. This is radicalisation. This is cyber prevent. This is bullying. This is exploitation. It all comes down to knowing your communities and knowing those individuals within your community so that you can support them the best way. Otherwise, it's very easy to get your flowchart out and think you just follow this particular path and it'll take you down a different direction. And we need to remember to remain flexible enough to make sure that we're focusing on the person rather than the activity.
Okay. So have we got any more questions or any more hands? Thank you, Sarah, for putting the evaluation in the chat. That's it, Adam. Gone quiet.
Again, can I take the opportunity just to say thank you all for taking the time to join today. Thank you for listening to me. First part of the minute, I was actually a little nervous about how this session was going to go, but that hour has flown by, Liz. I'm sure you would say the same thing as well from when you and I discussed this, what, about a fortnight ago, I think?
Mm-hmm.
Because we've come quite a long way to getting to this stage as well. So it's been really a really nice experience for me to have you all listen to me and for being fairly kind to me with the questions as far as that's concerned. If there's anything that I've said causes anyone any concern, anything anyone would like to discuss with me at another time, I'm quite happy to list my details to be shared. People are more than welcome to get in contact with me directly. And other than that, as I said to you again, thank you very much for your time and I wish you well, enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Adam. It's really, really great session, and you've got lots and lots of thank yous coming in from everybody. If you can see the chat,
I can now. Yeah, I've stopped sharing my screen. I have done now. Yes.
Thank you. Cheerio.
Thank you, everybody. If you could fill in your evaluation forms, that would be great. And just a reminder that there's lots more sessions all week. So I think they're all at the same time. 12 o'clock every day, so please do tap into as much as you can. Yeah, it's a great week, some really great speakers, and yeah, some good learning and chance to just sort of take a break and a pause from everybody's sort of busy working lives and just refresh ourselves sometimes is nice. So yeah.